bonjour tout le monde. Alors, je ne sais pas s'il y a beaucoup de francophones dans la pièce, mais permettez-moi de dire quand même quelques mots d'abord pour saluer l'organisation qui nous réunit aujourd'hui et pour saluer le thème choisi qui, je pense, nous rend particulièrement heureux et qui fait beaucoup travailler, dans le fond, là, notre fierté et nos relations aussi avec les autres provinces canadiennes. Je pense qu'il y a des échanges productifs qu'on peut avoir. So the theme of this conference is quite challenging, quite stimulating actually, because I think that in Quebec we have a lot to share. We have a lot to learn too. Actually, it's been decades since Quebec compares itself with Ontario specifically. And also that we do have some differences that we are actually cultivating. This, I think, sets the stage for what we can share, what we can learn from each other. And basically, I think that when there are just, when there's multiple models that can be found in the different provinces, well, the experience is a great tell about which one works better in which circumstances. So I think that in Quebec, we do have some specificities that are of an historical nature, let's say, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues will speak more on that, but for example, on pension plans, on investing in our economy, a little bit, well, in a way that is a little bit different from some other provinces, and all those institutions that we have, which are kind of different from the federal institutions. Myself, I work closely with the health minister in Quebec. So this is actually a new role for me. I'm an economist. This is the language I speak, the economy, the data, and in health, there's a lot of complexities that I've been totally unaware of beforehand. Alors évidemment, dans mes fonctions d'adjoint parlementaire au ministre de l'économie, on a beaucoup de défis. Healthcare is difficult in Quebec, it's difficult everywhere. The access to healthcare, the timely access and the timely, well, let's say the timely access, and also the organization of the public system is always difficult. Then again, we can innovate. Let me say first that we've learned from Ontario, and we are actually implementing some, and then I'm not sure, I'm going to look at my colleagues there, what we call the super infirmières, which are practitioner nurses, right? I think in English. So the practitioner nurses were fewer in Quebec, relatively to the population, obviously, than in Ontario, and we are trying to catch up. And we are trying also to foster new clinics with practitioner nurses, because it seems to be an innovative way to get the access the people need close to them in a way that is a little bit unconventional, but Ontario has been doing it for quite some time now, and we are trying to catch up. This is something that we've learned from Ontario, and actually, the day before yesterday, on the budget, we've announced the effort to open 23 more of those clinics in Quebec. But I think that we have taken a step to be at the forefront of one innovation, which is to have what we've called mini hospitals run by a private operator, but financed by the public. This is what I've been working on, and it's it's something that doesn't exist right now in Quebec, and I don't think that it exists as is in Canada either, but we are trying to have a new model because we are trying to innovate, to test possibilities. This is one possibility, and I'm also sure that by giving a universal access, a free for the patient access, we are absolutely within our rights and within the Canadian law of healthcare. But it is important, and I think that this is the innovation, that we allow a private operator to have room to maneuver, to innovate, to test new ideas, to bring forth actually good practices that will be inspiring for the public sector afterward, and probably the public sector will emulate some of the good innovations that are bring forth by this diversity of models. So in healthcare, I think that we are taking a step to be at the forefront, at least on that side. Obviously, there is a lot more to say on other particularities. We have the hydroelectricity bounty that we have from our geography. We also have a school system which is probably more mixed than in a lot of other provinces. And last but not least, and this is something that we'll probably discuss later on, but we do have, from the last 25 years, I'll say, we do have this strong social consensus about the equilibrium budget, the need to face our obligation to reduce the debt level and not to pay on a next generation's credit card what we are spending today. So this is something that and we're actually still in deficit, but we always have a plan to bring it back to zero. And we also have a fund, which is called the Generation Fund, to make sure that the debt level is reduced. So I think that I've made my time, and more of it. So thank you again for inviting me. I'm looking forward to debate all those ideas with you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. We're gonna have a quick and honest discussion, I think, this morning, mainly about what Quebec can teach the rest of the country. One thing, born and raised in Quebecer, now living in Gatineau, 6 minutes drive from here, the other side of the border, working each and every day with clients from the rest of Canada, whether they're associations, whether they're individual companies, and working with them with their needs towards the government of Quebec. I can tell you that one thing that Quebec as a province can teach the rest of the country is how to fight the federal government and how to be assertive in front of the Quebec government. But wait a minute, you will say, well, but that does not make us a country anymore if everybody fights the federal government. Well, I've heard over the last 6 or 7 years that a lot of people probably in this room are not sure we really have a strong country anymore. That's the first thing. And the second thing, well, you're going to tell me, well, isn't this the path to separatism? No, I would say this is the path to self-assertiveness and to be able to get your best result within the Federation and also to develop strong allies. A lot of people in the room will remember that about, I would say, 7, 8 years ago, there were only 1 truly conservative government in the whole federation. That was Saskatchewan, and that's it. Okay? Now the situation is a little bit different. So what can be learned from the experience of Quebec is Quebec over the last 40, 50 years has developed its province with some very strong economic and financial tools. Pension funds, investing arm from the government, and also being able to have its own police force, which to this day only the province of Ontario also has. So when you think about how as a province, and this is probably a message a little bit more from my friends from Western Canada, how can we be more assertive and develop a rapport de force with the federal government? Well, these are the institutions that you need to start to build. Alberta has done a very good job in having low taxes and being able to really have conservatives government throughout, except maybe for 4 years, half a decade ago. But one step that needs to be taken is that you need to be assertive and have your own institutions. Some people, some conservative will tell me that, okay, but then, well, you're thinking we should have more state, we should have the state do more thing. I don't think so. Especially in your core competences, healthcare, education, public safety, and also arguably on the environment side and immigration side, which is a shared competence between federal and provinces. It's not about having more state. It's about having maybe a state that you control a little bit more because it's your own province. Pretty hard to have a strong influence in federal government. Easier toward a provincial government, and then you can effect changes. But you need those institutions because the federal government has shown time and again, and I completely understand why. Whether the government was conservative, was liberal, was minority, majority, whatever, the federal government will fight for all Canadians, will try to defend its turf, whether it's in its jurisdiction and sometimes going into provincial jurisdiction. It is its job. It is what a lot of politicians do. They want to exert power in certain and different areas. But as a province, if you want to be able to assert this power, you need to build the tools to do that. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens over just a few years. It's something you do over years and decades. Of course, I would say from a conservative point of view, you need to be worried about some of the pitfalls of that. Quebec has done it a lot in the 60s and 70s, working with the unions and trying to build a separatist movement. Well, if you're Alberta, Ontario, British Columbia, probably it's not the way you want to do it, but at least you have a blueprint. And, Quebec has spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, going to court, preparing those institutions, working to build them up. Now you can just take the blueprint and do it. You can do it way more cheaply than Quebec ever did. And you can do it in a way that will function for your province. So maybe what you want to do with your pension fund is finding a way to have some money to invest in your natural resource. Maybe you want to have it to fund more your community sector or your healthcare sector. It is something that you can control as a province. And sometimes for a Quebecer like me, it's a little bit strange to hear that, oh, but there's nothing we can do in this area. There's nothing we can do. Yeah, we have the RCMP. I like a lot the RCMP, but I don't really know why you don't have a Saskatchewan Provincial Police or an Alberta Provincial Police, or even a few provinces that could get together just to be able to be closer to proximity and be able to also give this service. So what I would say, just at the end of my allotted 5 minutes, is that one thing that Quebec and Quebecers, I wouldn't say can teach English Canadian because it's patronizing a little bit, but at least that we can have healthy discussion about is, well, we want to set up our own pension fund. We'd like to get our own police corp. How do we do that? Come to Quebec and ask the question, because these are things that provincial government has done. And in the case of the police corps, for example, or the pension funds, it's not more state. It's just that you will have a little bit of a closer control because it's going to be done at the provincial level. And one last example I can give you getting out of that. People can like or dislike the Quebec cap-and-trade system with California for, GHG emissions. But when the current government proposed a carbon tax that's going to be in all provinces equal unless you have a system, Quebec was protected with that because they already had a system, and they said, well, we already have our own system. Other provinces, it's very hard to fight the carbon tax because you don't have the provincial institution to provide some kind of replacement, or at least to thwart the federal intervention. So I'll be more than happy to discuss with my fellow panelists today. And now, giving the mic to Pierre.
Bon matin tout le monde, bonjour, mon nom est Pierre Paulus, député conservateur de Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Si je continue à parler en français, c'est bien entendu que la majorité d'entre vous ne comprendra pas ce que je veux dire. So, if I continue to speak in French, most part of you won't understand. And it's the first thing we have to deal with when we talk about Quebec and the rest of Canada. The first thing is language. As a Quebec MP, I'm conservative Quebec MP, by the way. It's unusual maybe for you, but it's possible to be elected in Quebec. I've been elected for 3 times, and I've 8 other colleagues. So yes, the language is the first, the major, not an issue, but it's something complicated because a lot of people in Quebec doesn't speak English at all. And I grew up in the 70s, 80s without having to speak English. And in that time in school, we just have one lesson a week, just to say the weather report, that kind of stuff. It's slowy, snowy. That's it. That's how. Quebec government at this moment don't want us to speak English. It's why it's very difficult. But it's different for people from Montreal. In Montreal, there are a lot of community over there that speak English. There's a lot of English community. So like my cousin, they're from Montreal, and when they were young, they used to speak English with their friends and everyone, and watch TV in English. But out of Montreal, it's quite different. In the rural area, Quebec City, I'm from Quebec City. This times, we used to watch TV just in French at school and so and so. So it's why we have some difficulties to connect. And actually, we have my colleagues. I have some colleagues from Quebec, conservative MPs, who just try to learn English. They have some English lesson each single day in the morning. They try to speak English. But when we have some meeting, like today, or we have meeting in the House of Commons, it's easy because we have translation. But when we have private meeting, like in the morning, each morning I have meetings with Pierre Poilievre, and it's all in English. So if I don't speak English, it will be difficult for me to explain what I want to say, what I have to say. And for my colleagues who doesn't speak English, they have to stay in the back seats because they can't. But they are smart. They have a lot to say. But just the difficulty is to speak English. So I have some written comments. I will read it because I was not sure if I will be able to speak English this morning, but I'm not so bad, I think. But, so I read it, but my staff work a lot to make it up. So I practice a bit. So first of all, I want to thank the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference organizer for the invitation to participate in this panel. It's great to be here and glad to see that this event is well attended. Many Canadians no longer recognize their country. Once upon a time, not long ago, it was legal to have a personal opinion in Canada. We were allowed to think for ourselves, and we were allowed to speak up without facing consequences. But in 2015, a new world government was elected in Ottawa. This government, with the help of CBC and other government-sponsored media outlets, told Canadians that their position was the only reasonable position. If you so happen to disagree with their position, you were automatically branded a racist or something worse. This is not the Canada I grew up in, and it's not the Canada you grew up in. The good news is that we will soon see the end of the dark years of Justin Trudeau government. With the blind support of the NDP, Trudeau's minority government has governed this country like a dictatorship. However, their scandals are piling up, and more Canadians no longer support them. They have made a mess of our government institution, but we will gladly clean it up and erase their woke policies. Today, our topics of discussion include public finances, healthcare, education, and the values and identity of Quebec. It is true that Quebec is unique in Canada, but so is Alberta, so is the East Coast, so is Ontario, British Columbia, and the prairies. We have seen proof of this reality since 2015, when Justin Trudeau adopted a strategy of division for the benefit of his political party. Yes, Quebec is not afraid to stand up against a federal government that imposes its will without consultation. Alberta and other provinces have done the same, and I certainly applaud their desire to defend their citizens, even if the Prime Minister disagrees. What other provinces can learn from Quebec? That is not the question. The right question is, what can we learn from each other, and how can we work together to make sure that the current or future federal government works with provinces instead of imposing its will on them. Thank you. This is why I'm so excited about Pierre Poilievre's leadership. He wants to make this country a better place for families and businesses. And he realizes that provinces are unique and have their own unique challenges. Unlike Justin Trudeau, he doesn't believe in one size fits all. He believes that there's enough money in the system without having to reach out into your wallet for more. He believes that every dollar of new spending in the budget should be matched with $1 of savings. This helps ministers and bureaucrats prioritize their wish list, and I certainly support this. As for education and healthcare, we have always said that we will work with the provinces, as this is their jurisdiction. What is it? I practiced it many times, but and we respect that. So I look forward for your questions and hearing your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This was very interesting, a lot of interesting points that have been raised here. Let's start with finances. After all, the theme of this conference is working for the middle class, and the middle class is a financial group, we could say. Balanced budgets are at the core of conservative fiscal policy. Quebec used to be very fiscally irresponsible in the 1980s, 1990s. It went 40 years without a balanced budget. But in the last decade, it's actually been pretty good. We've had several balanced budgets in Quebec, while other provinces, including some that had conservative governments, were going into deficit. So, David, I want to start with you. How has Quebec been able to achieve and maintain fiscal responsibility, and have important public services faced major cuts because of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because up until, I would say, 8 to 10 years ago, Quebec was among the worst provinces in terms of public finances. One of the reasons being that the government wanted to do so many things that it had to tax, and of course, after taxing, they were able to spend a lot. There's three things that Quebec did. So starting in the late 90s, the first step, I think, was the anti-deficit law. So Quebec was mandated by law to have a balanced budget. Of course, until they changed some of the rules, various governments, whether they were Parti Québécois or Liberals, they were able to cook the books and to say, well, you know, a quarter of the deficit coming from the healthcare sector should be aside in the calculation, things like that. So they were able to cook the books. One thing that the provincial Liberals did well in 2003 is that, well, they changed the law so you couldn't cook the books anymore. The financial years were a little bit better. Quebec was able to balance its budget a few times. But one of the big differences was also, the day Quebec decided to spend a little less and also to grow its independent revenues, not resorting to taxes. So Quebec put in place a Fonds de Génération, which is a little bit like a sovereign fund. The only difference is that it doesn't invest a lot outside of the province. But basically to have a piggy bank that can be used to generate some revenues and to balance the budget. So right now, for example, this year in Quebec, the budget is not balanced, but it is very close, and the generation fund is up to $4 or $5 billion. So it helped Quebec to be able to balance its budget, but also, restraining some of the spending and being able to grow the province's revenues has also helped. Quebec is not the best of the best in the country right now, but especially we hear a lot of complaints about Quebec is overly dependent on equalization payments. Quebec is still a little bit dependent on that, but less and less. If you look at the budget this week in terms of the projection, Quebec is only going to receive per capita half of the money from equalization payment in 5 years compared to 8 years ago. So that's a big difference right now. Aside from Ontario, of all the provinces that receive equalization payment, Quebec is the one that gets the least per capita. So Manitoba and most of the Atlantic provinces now receive way more per capita than Quebec. So not perfect, but moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Yuri, I want to ask you, as a member of the CAQ government, the budget was released yesterday. How does a balanced budget law influence how you make your budgets? Because you can't do what like Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford do and have these humongous deficits.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll add to what David said, that in 96, 97, we had a big scare, and we have to remember that. We were facing actually a lower credit rating, which was kind of, the imminent threat that had to make sure we got back in touch with reality, I think. So basically, this was our wake-up call. It was also a pretty big exercise in building a consensus with a lot of groups that weren't, on the same page on that. But one thing that I would like to mention, even if it's from a liberal government, the definition of a balanced budget in Quebec is actually calculated after leaving a little bit aside on the generation fund. So the technical definition that we adopted makes sure that we save up a little bit for next generations. This, I think, is a pretty strong mechanism to make sure that there is always a forward-looking mechanism, and also that we can't have the impression that the government is always plentiful. He always has a lot of money. He can come to the rescue of in every situation. I think that we had to change a little bit the narrative. Also, and this is probably the fact that we have to take into account, it was set up, the Generation Fund was set up to attain a goal in terms of, how do you say, debt brut?
Yeah, the raw debt, right?
Yeah, raw debt. Well, so the biggest definition of the debt in terms of GDP, right? So we attained actually this objective. Now we are continuing to set aside something for the Generation Fund in each budget, but at a lower rate. So it's 2.5 billion in the year that's coming up. And with this lowering of money, we are actually lowering taxes for citizens. And I think this is also a result of a good result and a good incentive of the fiscal discipline that we've shown.
That's good. And maybe very, very, very quick one before we hand the mic to Pierre. Quebec was also able this year to make a down payment of $5 billion on the debt with the money that accumulated and accrued over the last few years in the fund.
All right, that's good. Pierre Palos, you mentioned a bit of Pierre Poilievre's pay-as-you-go policy. How does that compare or contrast to what Quebec has in place? Because from my knowledge, there is no legislation at the federal level for balancing the budget.
That's true, and I don't think we can. I don't think at federal level we can have that kind of law. But we have we need to have the leader or the government who want to do this. If we come back to Quebec, actually, we have to think when we think about Quebec, this is not a place where everyone wants to have all the money without doing anything. That's false. So it's something. All of Quebec, we always talk about equalization payment. We say, okay, the Quebecers always want all the money, they don't want to work, whatever. That's wrong. Like every provinces, we have people who work hard, we have people who don't work a lot, but we're all living on the same planet, and it's not different in Quebec. The thing is different. In Quebec, people pay a lot of income taxes. And taxes. This is the most taxes provinces, including the states, the United States. And people want to get rid of it. So it's why I was proud yesterday, the Quebec government cut taxes for people. So a lot of leftists say, oh, this is not good. Well, yes, thanks to them. But the leftist journalists say, no, don't cut taxes, don't cut taxes. Why? Why can we help people? So but about your question at federal level, so we have, as conservative, we have to balance budget, of course. Mm-hmm. And we have to, actually, with the last years, it's a mess. Like I've said in my speeches, yes. Billions of dollars been spent. And as you know, maybe you know that during the COVID, the 2 years of COVID, Trudeau spent $500 billion, but $200 billion of that money was not for COVID. It was not for the program to do the CRB, that kind of stuff. It was just waste money. So it will be a huge challenge for Pierre Poilievre and his new government to control everything. But about Quebec, actually that's true. The Quebec Premier, François Legault, he don't want to have equalization payment anymore. He do everything he can to change things, and it's why he wants to have a better Quebec, better prosperity. But on the other side, we have a huge challenge with the healthcare system. It's huge. Half of the Quebec budget is just for healthcare system, education, so and so. But they work a lot and they work hard to.
If I may, we're moving on to healthcare anyways. So, it has become quite obvious that Canada's single-payer public healthcare system is failing, and the majority of Canadians now support private options for healthcare. Quebec has ambitious plans to overhaul its healthcare system, and this will include building 2 mini private hospitals. So actually, Yuri, to you, why do you believe this will solve the current problem? And what do you have to say to those, I'm thinking especially NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, for example, who's making a video on Twitter every day warning us about US-style healthcare. How is this program not US-style healthcare?
It's a good question. Actually, I think that, as I said in my presentation, I think that there is a virtue in basically, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not sure how it's interpreted in English, but trying out different ways. Mm-hmm. You have to let actually various point of service flourish and make their point. Are we better to serve the patients than the next door, right? So there's kind of this multiplicity of solutions that we are trying to implement. For example, with private mini hospitals, but also with the practitioner nurses clinics, or the familial, how do you say, groupe de médecine familiale.
But family doctors.
Okay, family doctors then. And this multiplicity of approach has a virtue because it shows the result through experience. Also, it's probably a main argument. We have to realize, and this is something that we are discussing more and more in Quebec, that, for example, Western European countries all have a mix of private and public operators in their hospitals, in their clinics, in their healthcare. Even when they have a universal healthcare system, which is free for a patient, but the patient probably don't even see the difference when they are treated in a public hospital or a private clinic, because they don't pay. But they do have this possibility. Actually, in France, which is, not the most, not the closest to United States, let's say. In France, 60% of all chirurgical acts are in private clinics. So this can show you that in almost every country that has universal healthcare coverage, there is some sort of private entrepreneurship, right, like we do have in Canada from pharmacists, for example, or from dentists. And do you wait a lot of hours before seeing your pharmacist when you get in?
You get a text message from your phone like an hour after your prescription is ready. It's great.
So we do have to.
David, I want to get you actually to elaborate a bit on what Yuri said and just maybe a bit on the situation of healthcare and private healthcare in Quebec right now.
Lots of the confusion in Canada comes from that there are 3 different levels at which the state can or not intervene in healthcare. The first one is the healthcare itself. surgery, providing the healthcare service. The second one is the staff. Who pays the staff? Who manages the staff? Where the staff comes from? That's the second. And the third one are, everything else. The building, the administration, the laundry services, the catering, everything. In Canada, we have a vision, and I would say that's the NDP vision that's been there for all the time, is that, well, the state manages all three. It is registered in the Canada Health Act, or whatever you want to call it. 8,000 people working to manage how many hospitals? 0, because even for veterans now, it's provinces that are taking care of the hospitals. So you basically have this vision that is unique in the world, honestly. And you have the United States, which is a system where some of the acts, now a lot with Medicaid and Medicare, are paid by the public sector, and the rest is mostly managed by the private sector. Western Europe is more of a mix. Asia is very different whether you have private insurance or not, so it's not really good comparables. But one thing Quebec has done is fight to the court, going with the Arrêt Shaoli in the 1990s, at a time where the Supreme Court of Canada was, or maybe it was early 2000, but the Supreme Court was even way lefter than it is right now. And it's still allowed from private healthcare. So it's also an example that, Quebec has been a trailblazer in terms of that, and other provinces are following. So I think British Columbia is probably the closest one to have some kind of a mixed model. And a lot of this pressure in British Columbia is also coming from the left, from the community group that say we need specific intervention, whether it's regarding the opiate crisis or other, community needs of people that don't really have a lot of money, but that they will like the possibility to organize some kind of HMOs where they could manage their own things. So I would say this is something in terms of healthcare that I see openings in terms of a left-right continuum that is not specifically an issue on the right. Of course, when you think about personal rights, individual rights, I'm able to pay money if I want to get the healthcare services. But provinces should be open to this, and I think it's going to happen anyway because of the crisis in the healthcare sector. Not a lot of money, just a lot of needs. You see, Quebec is close to 50% in terms of its budget for healthcare. I was watching the budget of Saskatchewan yesterday, only 38%. So there are some differences between different provinces, and other provinces could have the possibility to do what, fortunately, I think Quebec has been trying to do for many years.
Yeah, for sure. Pierre, I want to kind of bring in a federal perspective into this. It's clear that the status quo is broken, and I think trying to fix a broken system would be Einstein's definition of insanity in some way. What's the Conservative Party's stance on healthcare reform? Would a Poilievre government support, for example, provinces building small private hospitals?
Yes. As Conservative, we support this, of course.
Okay.
But as you know, we have to, when we talk about healthcare, we have to be careful because it's the provincial jurisdiction. But for myself, I really like the mixed system, and the most important thing is that this is not the private clinics are not just for people who can pay. It's for everyone. So they refer because they're different kind of surgery or scan or whatever. So they just have to go there with the card, the carte soleil, and then a care card, and then they have the service. So it's not something just for the rich people. It's for everyone, but it's they have better management, and they fix the price with government. So they said if for a scan would be $400, example. So government paid the private clinics, but people don't have to care about this. So that's fine. On our side for the Conservative Party, maybe you seen last week. Proposition from Pierre Poilievre, talk about the Blue Seal. What we have to do actually to help the healthcare system in Canada is to find a way to have more doctors, more nurses, and we have a lot of trouble, first of all, for the immigrants, and also for people who, example, a doctor from Quebec can, maybe I'm wrong, but as an example, can't work in BC because they don't have the same exam, or worse, people who, Canadian who went to US or Europe to have their to become doctors, they can come back in Canada to work. That's crazy. They're Canadian, but because they went overseas, they can come back and said, I want to be a doctor in my country. So it's last week Pierre Poilievre proposed the Blue Seal. Blue Seal would be kind of a national exam, say, for doctors to be, okay, you're from Quebec, Ontario, you study outside, or overseas, don't care. Pass the exam, Canadian exam, and you will be able to work anywhere in Canada. That's the first thing. And for immigrants too, that's a huge problem. Yeah, as you know, a lot of people are doctors, nurses. They come in Canada, they have to be taxi driver or clean whatever.
I've met so many taxi drivers who had these elitist jobs. I mean, my driving instructor was the top engineer for the Emirati government in Dubai, and here he teaches 16-year-olds how to drive cars. I mean, that's a broken system.
Yeah, so it's why we have to find a way to fix it.
Right.
But that's we as the federal level also for the it's in English medicaments, the medicament,
The drugs?
drugs. In the US, they can approve drugs much faster than in Canada. It's not normal. The system here, Health Canada, it's so slow. They don't work fast enough, and people have to wait, or people can't have drugs they need because our system is too slow. So at federal level, we have to find a way to fix this.
Right, for sure. Okay, so we've got a little under 10 minutes left. We're going to briefly go through our last topic. I'll ask you guys to keep your answers at 1.5 minutes, ideally. So the federal-provincial relations, Quebec has done quite well when it's comes to dealing with the federal government. Quebec has its own pension plan. Quebec has its own revenue agency, its own police force, gets to decide how many immigrants it takes in and requires them to take a values test, and even got a special carbon tax deal. Other provinces, notably Alberta and Saskatchewan, think they're not being treated fairly by the government, and they want more autonomy. What advice would you, and we'll start with David, have for these provinces, notably Alberta, Saskatchewan, who have now both introduced autonomy legislation, just as the now infamous Alberta Sovereignty Act?
Yeah. So basically, a little bit, regarding my introduction a few minutes ago, you need to build strength, and you need to get to the discussion table from a position of strength. So you need to build those institutions. I would say have a war chest and work collaboratively with other provinces, because the federal government has always been very good at picking a few provinces and putting them as an example, so the others would have to follow. So you just need to make sure that you can have those discussions. I remember the ex Quebec Premier built with his colleagues, the Conseil de la Fédération, to be able to discuss those issues. I feel that against the divide and conquer strategy that sometimes the federal government is using, it would be good for a lot of the provinces to have more collaboration, even in specific sectors, and not only be about complaining, but also be about proposing solutions that the federal government would not have a choice but to accept, because otherwise it would pay a political price.
Right. Your government seems to be doing quite well with the feds. What's your secret? Is it separation? Is it the threat of separation?
I don't think so, actually. And this is something that has changed quite a lot since 2018, when the CAC won the election for and breaking the alternates for the last 50 years. So it's probably not that. It's probably, and maybe let me say that, maybe we have been cocky in the past, so the door is open, right? I think that we do have this proximity with the citizens in some public services that allow the government to say, well, thank you, federal government, but we know way better the needs of our citizens, and we represent the same people, right? So I think that it's a self-explaining argument, but I think that the door is open, and as Mr. Polius said, we do have things to learn from other provinces too. We do have to get inspired by some of other policies, so we'll share on this quite a lot, I'm quite sure.
How will, under a Poilievre government, if Poilievre is to win the next election, how will relations with provinces change? Because a lot of provincial governments are unhappy with the Trudeau Liberal approach.
Well, how the Liberals works, it's Ottawa knows best. It's always the same. So Justin Trudeau likes to say he will do like this, like this, like that. So it will be totally different with Pierre Poilievre. Each provinces have to make their own businesses, I'll say. But what I want to say is for Quebec, for the last 50 years, near 60 years, we was living in a kind of a bubble, you know. You imagine Quebec, we have a bubble, a kind of dome, and we built institution, we built different things, childcare, whatever, and actually, what as a Quebec MP, conservative MP as well, what I want is to share everything we did good, and to say to other provinces what we did wrong, to don't do the same mistake. So we have good things, we have a lot to share, but with the new generation who speak English better than me, so it would be easier to have better relation together, and to say, and for you, please, don't see Quebec as a separatist province, just want to separate. It's still have people who want this, because they're looking at Quebec and say, oh, we have everything we need. We can play alone, but this is not what the majority of people from Quebec want. Majority of Quebec people are proud to be Canadian, but when we look at the media, they always try to say, oh, Quebec, you know, Quebec, right. But on facts. I'm elected as a Conservative MP, so the majority of people in my riding in Quebec City vote for me, like for my other colleagues. So it's a proof that in Quebec, there's not only separatists. Right. And also the separatist party in Quebec last election, PQ, just have 3 MLA. So it's all mostly erased from the map. So there's more the CAQ, it's a national party. They're proud to be from Quebec. They talk proudly from the roots. But on the other side, we want to work with all Canadians. It's one country, and it's what part of government will work for unity.
Right, and actually, I saw a poll, there's more separatists in Alberta than in Quebec now, so that just shows how dead the movement seems to be. Before we wrap up, we have to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to Quebec, and that is Bill 21 and Bill 96, which, as a Quebecer, I think are quite misinterpreted in the rest of Canada. So, David, you're the policy expert. Why has the Quebec government introduced Bills 21 and Bill 96? And to be a devil's advocate, what's your response to allegations that these are racist, bigoted bills?
Well, first I'd like to thank our great moderator for throwing me this hot potato. Well, I'm going to take the always institutionalist perspective on that. So basically, every time you deal with the Charter of Rights and Freedom and different rights in Canada, it is a sensitive topic. And it is a sensitive topic on all sides of the aisle, you know, whatever side you are. But we saw over the last few years also Ontario considering using the notwithstanding clause for something about devolution of power to municipalities, which is something that is probably less consequential than language rights and other kind of rights. So Quebec has made this decision, and Bill 21 and Bill 96 are different. I know Bill 96 way better, if only because a lot of my clients now need to comply. Businesses from 25 to 49 people having to, have their instruction manuals and everything in French in Quebec. I think this one is pretty much a continuity of Bill 101 and not that different as a bill. Of course, Bill 21 on religious symbols for people that work in the public sphere is something that was quite brand new. And what was completely different in Quebec is that the government had announced before the bill was tabled that it would use the clause should the bill pass, whatever the tribunals or the courts are going to say. But I remember at the time that there were a lot of voices in English Canada that were against the bill, still are. Very good reason. There are very good reasons to be against that. But there's also good reason to be in favor, and there were quite a few voices also that were in favor of that. I remember some provincial politicians that said, well, we might do that and use the clause ourselves. And Quebec, there was a lot of I would say, I wouldn't call it social unrest, but definitely unsettling discussions over 10 years regarding those issues. And rather than go the Parti Québécois way and have a value test and having to prove that you're a good Quebecer and everything, the current government pretty much abided by the Quebec consensus. And in this case, Quebec, like in other cases, said, well, we don't know if the rest of the country would agree with us, but we'll move forward anyway. I don't think the debate is quite settled yet. I think there's still going to be discussion. There are exceptions that are considered, but it is definitely a topic that is evolving and that's continued to evolve. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the same kind of debate arise in other provinces. You know, Quebec is still very, very open to immigration. Sorry to say, but even though the government says that, oh, we're going to have a cap here and there, every year they find a way to welcome more people than in previous years. But that's going to be an interesting topic moving forward over the next few years. And I think it is a topic that the rest of the country needs to connect with Quebec. And it is a topic where you can have a really good and honest discussion, and everybody can be in the same room and discuss that.
Right. Well, thank you for that explanation. That is all the time we have. I hope that you found this interesting. Again, our panelists, MP Pierre-Paul Huss, David Boudouille-Lefebvre of Boudouille Public Affairs, and CAC MNA, Yuri Chassin. Thank you so much for being here.